Hi, I'm Paige Gross. I'm the lead reporter at Technically Philly, and I'm here with Terry Laban.
Hi, I'm Terry.
And so, Terry, can you explain your career a little bit to me?
Explain my career. Well, uh, ever since I was 6 years old, all I wanted to be was a cartoonist. Um, and the times I thought maybe I should do something more practical. It never really turned out that way. So uh, I've basically been a cartoonist my entire working life since I was 25, more or less. Haven't really had another job. Have had some less than full-time, a couple less than full-time jobs, not too many. I've basically supported myself through my work pretty much since day one. I was really fortunate, and I mean, this goes to some of the changes that have happened over the years, but when I started working, when I sort of put myself out there after I graduated from school in 1984, so I'm pretty old. And after that, I traveled for a year and a half, and then I came back. I graduated from art school. I went to art school at University of Michigan. I'm originally from the Detroit area, so it wasn't a long way to go for me. But when I came back, I from my trip, I traveled for a year and a half. I moved to Ann Arbor, and I was really fortunate. I kind of fell into a gig doing local political cartoons for the Ann Arbor News,
Oh, cool.
which at that time was a fairly significant publication.
Yeah.
It had like 20-some thousand circulation daily newspaper. It no longer exists, or it might online now, but back then it did. So wandered in there to show them. I had made an illustration portfolio since I didn't actually have any freelance work, and I wandered in and to show them that, and they said, "Oh, you do cartoony stuff. The editor's interested in local political cartoons." And pretty soon I was doing 4 a week, and I could like pretty much live on that and a combination of that and doing freelance illustration and caricatures and things like that. So so I was doing that. I was really interested in getting into, I really wanted to do comics. At that time, the alternative comic book scene was sort of just starting, mainly led by a company called Fantagraphics Books. I put out some mini comics and ended up getting a publishing deal with them. Started doing, I did my first series for them starting in 1989. Ended up doing another series for them, another series for a company called Dark Horse. Got into mainstream comics mostly as a writer. All that time, I was doing illustration work, moved to Chicago, started working for a publication called In These Times. That was my part-time job, but even though I was doing like paste up stuff, this was before computing. So we were like actually laying up things with wax. I was a stat machine in the back. I would take pictures of all the art on this massive camera, and then you'd wax them and you'd actually paste them down on the paper. When they computerized, they didn't need me to do that anymore, but they kept me on as an illustrator, just sort of, I wasn't quite freelance because I was on their payroll, but I worked at home. So, and I still work for them.
Oh, cool.
Many years later, yeah, it's been almost 30 years. That's like kind of a freak out. But so in Chicago, I sort of basically worked in the comic book industry as a writer and an artist, did freelance stuff, all the stuff I'd been doing. Did that until about 1998. Then there was kind of an industry and a personal crisis. I did a lot of writing for DC Vertigo, and I wanted to do that more, but I'm not a superhero person. I don't like superheroes. Never did. Came up in a completely different end of the comic book industry, but as it turns out, you really can't go very far in the comic book industry unless you like superheroes.
Yeah.
That's where the money is, really, or have that kind of aesthetic. I don't. So I kind of got to my maximum potential. And then there was a big industry shakeup, and all my editors resigned, and comic books crashed, which they periodically do. And I thought at that time, like, oh God, I'm gonna have to go to law school, or I had 2 kids, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. Like, I was pretty much 40, like never made like a lot of money. I mean, I made enough to keep going, but but at that time I ended up getting syndicated. So my comic strip, which I co-created with my wife, called Edge City, got syndicated in 2001. It hit the streets, and ended up doing that for the next 15 years. Moved to Philadelphia around that time also, and basically continued to do like that and my freelance stuff.
Mhm.
That ended in 2015, and I had this friend that I'd gone to college with, a cartoonist friend named Lloyd Dangle, who uh, is known chiefly to the public. He created the original Airborne box.
Mm.
You see the Airborne with the cartoon guy on it? You know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about? The Airborne stuff you take
Yeah.
to prevent colds. They don't use his image anymore, but they use one that's very close to his. I'm not sure why they cut him out. I never asked him about it, but uh, so he's a cartoonist. He's an alternative sort of. He was doing an alternative strip for like weekly newspapers and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he lives in San Francisco, so I hadn't been in touch with him much. But I'm LinkedIn friends with him, so I got this notice saying Lloyd Dangle is now, has switched careers. He's now doing graphic recording. I was like,
Mhm.
graphic recording, what's that? So I wrote him. I was like, Lloyd, what's graphic recording? And he told me what it was. I go to meetings and events, and I record what's happening in real time using a combination of words and images. I was like, wow, that sounds really interesting. At the time, so I was still doing this strip, and it was just like, well, that's an interesting thing. I'm not gonna pursue it. That's like another thing I don't know anything about. But when the strip started to end, I started thinking, wow, maybe that's a possibility. I didn't really know what I was gonna do next.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was just, it was getting harder and harder to make money doing cartoons. I mean, the industry, all the traditional ways that cartoonists have made money are pretty much gone now.
Mhm.
Like the height of being a cartoonist used to be being a syndicated cartoonist. That was like getting tenure, as a
Right.
cartoonist. But as the newspaper industry's collapsed and the readership, has basically vanished,
Mhm.
not so much. You can't sell gag panels anymore except to the New Yorker. The alternative, all the weekly newspapers went away when Craigslist came online. So all these ways that you used to be able to make money being a cartoonist are just kind of gone.
Yeah.
So I wrote him and I said, Lloyd, tell me more about graphic recording.
Yeah.
And following, that conversation and pursuing it and getting some training, I started doing that. And I kind of combined it with a lot of other things I was doing to kind of rebrand and recreate myself as what I am today, which I call myself a visual storyteller.
Mhm.
And that sort of encompasses a variety of work with text and images to tell stories and get across business messages in an engaging and interesting and creative way.
Yeah. What I know you from is doing our events, Technically's events. So kind of sitting in on, for example, in May, we had the virtual introduced, and I know you sat in on a couple of panels and did live recordings of it. Could you show me the technology that you use or screen share with me for a second?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let me do that. I've just been charging up my Apple Pencil here. So it's really just an iPad, right? And I mean, before that, for the 2 years prior to that, I was doing introduced live.
Right.
So I came there with a bunch of foam core and markers, which is how graphic recording is usually done in the before times. And that was the bulk of my work until this year was doing it live with markers.
Yeah.
But now everybody's afraid to go outside. So it's really just my iPad, right? Not even a very new iPad. I got this in 2017, but it still seems to be working pretty well. So so you got your Zoom going, you got all your little Zoom windows.
Right.
And you plug your iPad in with your dongle into one of your ports on your iPad. And then there's a software called ManyCams that creates a virtual camera within your computer. Cool. So you can go to your video where it says on your video selection, you can open it up and you'll see a choice for ManyCam virtual webcam. You click on that. And where's my iPad? You should see your iPad in the window. It was there before. Maybe it's because I unplugged it. Let me see if I can get it back. There it is.
So was this technology you were using before, or you had to kind of figure it out when the pandemic hit and events became like completely virtual?
I had to figure it out, and it was a little hairy at first. Fortunately, do you want to see me or do you want to see the iPad?
I think the iPad would be cool. I don't know if you were working on anything or if you
Well, I mean, I'm always working on something, but I don't have any graphic recording here. How come it's not? Oh, I see. So, fortunately, there is a robust discussion forum on Facebook for graphic facilitators. So I basically put a request up there saying, "Help me do this," and I got a lot of response. And it turned out not to be so hard. There was a period of a couple months when they updated Zoom for security purposes, where and you couldn't get, it wouldn't support ManyCam. So that was a little scary. You had to use an older version, and I don't know. And then they started not letting you use an older version, but now they've fixed that. So everything's good. And it's really easy. That's all it is. And then, you know, what's nice about it is people can see your image without it being a screen share. So it's not taking over the whole thing. It's just, you're just kind of present through the session. Right. Of course, they can share it if they want, so that's good. And then you can record. I also record it on using QuickTime. You can record it on your Mac, and then I make like a time-lapse video. I take the video that results and, you know, compress it and make a time-lapse video of the process that they can post, which is really cool. So you get that. There's a lot of things I like about it. It's really easy to change things. Whereas, you know, when you do graphic recording with markers, I mean, you can change things a little and fix corrections a little bit, but not that much. I mean, you kind of have to go with what you have. Yeah. And because it happens on the fly, it's very improvisatory. I mean, it's very, I don't know if that's a word, but there's a lot of improvisation. You just have, if that's still true when you do it on the iPad, but you know, you can move things around. If you've got a big space, you can make them smaller. You can make another layer and put some color underneath. You know, there's a lot that you can do. Oh, that's not any layer. There we go. But there's a lot you can do there's really a lot of flexibility. You can put a background on it. Oops. This is my process through the whole thing. I'm like perpetually pressing on things and it's the wrong thing.
Do you see going forward, like let's say a year from now when we're allowed to have regular events, do you see like kind of a hybrid model of sometimes you might do like still the Zoom kind of version of illustrating and sometimes hopefully back in action and IRL?
Oh gosh, who knows what's gonna happen, right? I mean,
yeah, that year estimate is just pulled that right out of nowhere. But
yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, I don't see big live events coming back before. I mean, I don't think they're going to come back before 2022.
Yeah.
Unless there's a vaccine, you know, before that. So, and once people get really used to doing it this way, then I think kind of all bets are off. But
how does that change your outreach about doing this for events, or has it been, are there easier parts about it? Are there harder parts about it than getting, you know, hired for a live event?
Well, there's certainly, there's a lot of easier parts about it. I mean, I don't have to go down to Center City with, you know, a huge stack of foam core and try to park in front of like, you know, some building on like Walnut Street where there is no parking and then like take all my foam core in. I mean, you know, you don't have to get there an hour and a half early and set everything up. And, you know, I mean, physically, live graphic recording is actually like a pretty demanding thing because you have to schlep like all your stuff up, you know, get it all set up. And then you have to stand for 5 hours drawing, you know, it's difficult. So this is much easier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting at home, all I got to do is plug in my iPad, and I'm sitting at home at and I actually like put it on my drawing board. I can set it up and just draw like I would normally. So that's really nice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that you do lose something. I mean, I think having a graphic recorder at a live event is a bigger, more noticeable thing that provides a lot more engagement in the
Yeah.
room, because you're creating an object in that physical space. So, I mean, I think that's a loss, you know. That's something that I like about it. That's something, are you making that noise? That's something that the audience really likes about it. I don't think, you know, of appearing in your little window, I don't think that's anywhere near as engaging
Right.
as being live in the room. And when it's a big event and there's like hundreds of people, I mean, you're going to get totally lost. So I don't love that. You know, on the other hand, on the plus side, I really like the work that I can create.
Yeah.
I think you can do much. You have a lot more control over what you're doing. You can create much nicer pieces.
Mm-hmm.
The marker stuff, like I say, I mean, because it's very you know, you just improvise it and you never know what's going to happen. I mean, if you don't pay attention, you can really mess something up very easily, and then you have to live with it, or figure out how to, you know, people don't, you know, I'm good enough at it so that people don't necessarily know, but I know, and it bugs me. Whereas with the digital stuff, it's very easy to fix.
For sure.
So, I mean, you give a little to get a little. I mean, I don't think that we've really seen, you know, what the new normal is. I mean, I think everybody's just sort of improvising right now, waiting to see what happens. So, and I have no idea what that new normal is going to be.
Yeah. Other than the physical aspect of like what tools you're using, how do you think that kind of having to move toward more technology in your design has changed your design in the last year or so?
Well, I've been working, I mean, I started working primarily on an iPad in 2017. And before that, when I was doing the strip, I did the strip all in ink on paper, in the traditional way. I mean, and I scanned it, and then I'd finish it in Photoshop and put, you know, I do my color and my dots and I move things around and whatever, but still the primary creation was still Bristol and ink and whiteout and whatnot. But in 2017, I got the iPad and just said, I'm going to go digital from now on. That's the new way. And like, you know, that's going to give me a lot more options. And there was like a learning curve, but so I was pretty comfortable working digitally anyways when all this started. That was not a huge change for me. You know, overall, I mean, I'm not nostalgic for ink and paper. I'm glad I developed my skills on ink and paper. But you know, you can do so much, and it's so much easier to work digitally. I mean, so yeah, I mean, so, you know, it's real. I mean, and I've gotten a lot more digital now, you know, like I don't letter by hand very much anymore.
Yeah.
I was used to do that. But I mean, besides the fact that I can't leave the house anymore, you know, I can't do like live events. Otherwise, the workflow is pretty much the same, you know, and I do, you know, and there's been like a real drop off of events of any kind. So I haven't been doing near as much graphic recording this year as I was last year and the year before that. So I've been doing a lot of other freelance projects that, you know, and that's like all digital work at home anyways. So it's not a huge change.
Yeah. Well, I think as we go into the rest of 2020, I think it's pretty clear that any sort of event that we would have foreseen will be virtual. So can you talk about how to reach out to you if someone would like to hire you for either their virtual event or 2 years from now when we have real live events again?
I mean, the best way to reach me is to go to my website, www.breakthroughvisuals.com. You can see like all the stuff I do. There's like contact form. I'm, you know, always doing reach out stuff and promotional stuff, you know, at least when I'm not really busy, but I do promote. So that's the best way to find me, really.
Got it.
And I get pretty good SEO, so I should come up. If you Google graphic recorders in Philadelphia, I should come right up.
Yeah, cool. And I think we'll close out with one last question, which is, can you talk about some of your favorite projects that you've done in your career?
Gosh, and I know you asked me that. I just think about it. Introduced is always great.
Yeah.
It is. And you know what? I'll tell you something. Introduced, like, I'm so grateful, and I'm not, I'm going to blow smoke at you guys, but
Yeah.
I'm really grateful to technically Philly, because you guys kind of launched my career around here. My first Introduced that I did in 2017 really got me going and really just led to like a lot of work. And it's been Introduced has been like my best event. I mean, and this year, even when I did it virtually, I've gotten a number of jobs, okay. Not recording, I got a video, and it just, people really saw me. So, I mean, that's been a great thing, God bless you guys. I mean, it's funny, grab recording things, they're all kind of like, they all kind of blend into each other. It's really hard to say. There's not like a lot of peak moments, I mean, I've done some, pretty interesting. I think actually the beginning of the year, before everything closed down, I did like this little thing at City Hall, and I ended up in a room with the mayor and 5 or 6 kids that had done some notable achievements. So that was really interesting. And I'd never been up in City Hall before, so I felt like I was like kind of in the inner sanctum or something.
Yeah.
You end up sitting, when you do this work, you end up going to like sitting in with like a lot of sort of like executive meetings and like hearing all these secret things that people say. It like basically
kind of like journalism, honestly.
Yeah. That doesn't really mean like a lot to you because you don't know the issues, but it is kind of interesting. There's always this feeling like, well, what am I doing in this room with these people? But that's the job. So
thanks.
All right.
Thanks for chatting.
Really appreciate the interview. So.
Awesome.